Hello, my name's Huw Davies. I'm a filmmaker, a photographer, and curator, and I'm delighted to be here today virtually as part of Artcore's artist takeovers. Obviously, we're all going through quite interesting and challenging and difficult times at the moment, but it's great that we can still use this technology to talk and debate and communicate with each other, even if we're in isolation. I'm currently sort of working from home, which is up in North Northumberland, which is where I'm talking to you today. And this is the first time I've used Facebook Live, so please bear with me. Hopefully this is going to work. As you can see, I've got a screen next to me, and I'm going to show some sort of photographs and film extracts on that. I'm sure there's a more seamless way of dealing with this on Facebook Live, and I probably need to do a little bit more research to sort of find out exactly how that sort of works. But this is my solution for the moment. It means that you can see the relevant pictures while I'm talking about the work, but it has the disadvantage that occasionally you have to look at me as well. But hey, nothing's perfect. As at the end of this session, I'll give you a Vimeo link so you can actually watch the film Utran Conversations, which I'm going to be talking about in a moment, in your own time, and you can watch it uninterrupted from start to finish. As I mentioned, my own practice is in film and photography, and I've worked with both sort of media, both the moving image and the still image, for the last 30 years now. Most of my work has been sort of loosely documentary based, originally working editorially for magazines and newspapers, but also exhibiting in galleries, making books, producing documentary films for TV broadcasters such as the BBC and Discovery. And in the 90s and the noughties, I also made a number of short films for the Arts Council, which were partly fiction, or really crossed the line between sort of fact and fiction, in that they had a sort of basis in reality and in events, but they used a number of interesting formal visual devices like sort of back projection and day for night lighting, playing with this idea of an audience suspending disbelief, which of course is what cinema is all about. Also, for the last few years, I've been involved in programming for film festivals, and I set up a film festival in the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed, England's most northerly town on the Scottish borders, which has been running annually since 2005. It specialises in artist film and video and experimental cinema, and exhibits work in installation environments in a number of different site-specific locations, which are sited around the old Elizabethan town walls. So what I'm going to talk about today are two very different projects that I've been working on for the last year or so. One is based in China and the other one in India. One is a photographic project and one is a film project. They're both based in two of the largest and most densely populated countries in the world, countries that have both seen huge economic expansion over the last few years or recent years, although with COVID-19 that I'm sure is going to change. It's certainly going to slow down. But they're also very different societies. One is about society that's still very authoritarian, very much a command and control culture, mixing sort of Marxist principles with a particular form of capitalism. And the other is a democracy where freedom and choice are celebrated, but sometimes not always achieved. And the film is about Utran, which is the annual kite festival, a joyous celebration where the kite is seen as a symbol of freedom and high aspiration. So understanding the societal and cultural framework from where both these projects have come from is really important. But I think it's also interesting, given the current global crisis that we're all in at the moment, and how much that's going to change for the future, and how those societies will have to reevaluate and adopt and adapt in a very different world, which I'm sure will exist once the sort of current crisis is over. So the first project I'm going to show is a series of photographs taken in the Xi'an area of China, and I'm going to move over to the screen now. Now, basically, once I've got the camera on the screen, I can't actually see any sort of comments that are coming up, so I'm going to have to probably deal with those at the end. So this is a project. I mean, over the last 2 years, I've been lucky enough to sort of work on a project at Hebei University in Baoding, which has been looking at producing what I describe as a living archive, a documented history of some of the massive changes that have been taking place in China at present. It started actually from a project looking at the sort of Chinese megacities, cities like Chongqing and Guangzhou. I mean, cities that most of us in the West have never heard of, and in a very short period of time have really grown beyond imagination. And you can see actually from this image here, which is a model of the new housing developments in sort of Baoding, which is one of the cities that I've been working out of. And you can see actually that that is a sort of new housing development. That's actually going to expand the city itself within the next 2 years to around about 3 million people, which is probably about twice the size of Birmingham, which gives you some sort of idea of the sort of massive sort of expansion that's sort of taking place, particularly in China at the moment. But most recently, I sort of focused on the Xi'an new area, and that's the sort of the world's largest economic development zone, and it is sort of seen as a sort of new model city. It's almost sort of utopian in nature, focused around sort of innovation and green industries, and sort of set into this quite scenic ecological environment and background. I'm going to move the camera just forward a little bit. There we go. And Xi'an is located between the rapidly expanding urban centres of Baoding, Tianjin and Beijing, sort of 3 very big cities. And in the centre of that sort of triangulation is the Baiyang Lake, which is a sort of a massive wetland community, which is almost becoming a sort of a cultural playground for people living within the sort of the major cities. But it's also a place where they're actually starting to build the new model city of Xi'an. They're reclaiming some of that wetland in order to build the new city there. This is a sort of major legacy project. It was personally initiated by President Xi Jinping in 2017, and provides a sort of blueprint for China's future inland metropolitan areas. And you can see here actually from the sort of the images I'm showing at the moment about the sort of transformation of the sort of surrounding rural spaces as cultural and leisure playgrounds, but also the fact that the images are looking as well at the sort of the transformation of the urban landscape as well in conjunction with that. So it's about looking at these sort of 2 particular spaces. Underlining all the photographs, I think, is a reference to a society that is contained and controlled, which is something that permeates every aspect of Chinese society. If you ever try and sort of get onto using the internet in China, incredibly sort of difficult, use of sort of firewalls, preventing distribution of sort of information, and it's a very sort of controlled and censored society. And I just wanted to make sort of reference to that in a quite sort of subtle and less so overt way, because it's always in the background, but nevertheless ever present. So many of the images that I've used here refer to barriers and sort of marked out parameters, and often these sort of contrast with these sort of very sort of idealized corporate environments, often on sort of building hoardings like we have here, for instance, and they contrast with the sort of the reality of the life that's sort of unfolding up front. So these are all sort of taken in the new Xi'an model city. The project is sort of currently in progress. It's obviously been put on hold with the coronavirus outbreak, but the intention is still to sort of is to exhibit and publish the work, hopefully at some point next year. And although China itself is now sort of returning back to work after the coronavirus outbreak, it'll be interesting to see what sort of impact and influence the crisis has had on the Xiaonan project itself, as we move into this new world order. So the second project I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to change everything on the screen now. Hang on, just bear with me. Fit the screen. There we go. This is a film that was made by myself and another filmmaker. I'm just going to play a section of it actually. The other filmmaker was Huw Basi, and it was part of a international artist residency which was organised by Artcore in Baroda, Gujarat state in India in January last year. The 2-week residency took place at the Reliance Arts Centre in Baroda and coincided with Utran, which is one of the world's largest kite festivals, a quite spectacular 2-day celebration when the whole population of the city comes out onto the terraces en masse to fly kites. It sort of marks the first day of the Hindu solar calendar when the days become longer than the nights, and it's that sort of transition, if you like, from winter to summer. But it's very much a family celebration that brings together different communities and sort of crosses religious divides. So the film Utran Conversations follows the enormous preparations leading up to the festival and the whole industry attached to that, which includes things like the making of kites, which involves the employment of thousands of home workers, plus the making, the dyeing, and the glass coating of threads, and these huge auctions and sort of mass street markets that take place where the kites themselves are sold, and all the associated apparel of kite flying is sold as well. However, the film also has a sort of another aspect to it, and one of the sort of the things that it deals with, or is also the major environmental costs that sort of take place as well, particularly to the local wildlife, because the sort of balance of the natural ecosystem is disturbed by the presence of things like sort of glass coated threads, which are used in the kite flying, and also the fighting rituals that take place as well. And as a consequence of that, thousands of sort of birds die every year. And it even causes human fatalities as well, particularly the sort of motorcyclists, driving through the towns where the threads have fallen. So as part of the film, we spent quite a bit of time with many of the NGOs and charities that are involved in sort of saving and rescuing the wildlife as well. And you can see here, this was one of those NGOs, and the sort of set of interviews that we did with someone that was running a sort of animal ambulance, rescuing the wildlife. And very early on in the film, we decided that we wanted to sort of tell the story more sort of visually, really. I'll just find a section here. This is quite a good section. Visually, without using any sort of voiceovers, but actually using long takes and tracking shots that allowed the audience to become immersed in the intensity of what was going on. And that ranged from creating quite sort of intimate scenes, as you can see here, with people sort of making the kites, and engaging with some of the individual characters involved in the sort of preparations for the festival. It went from that, through to the extremes, which I'll show a little bit later on, of the chaotic madness of the street markets, with literally thousands of people rushing around the day before the festival to buy a kite. And so, extending that principle, we were also quite interested in the way in which, if I just start this section, in the way in which we could create something that was more like a sort of film poem, really, than a straight story. I mean, you can see here from this particular sequence that there were some elements that almost seemed like a choreographed event, particularly the sort of sequence, where the threads were being sort of coated with glass, and the use of very long tracking shots. We were trying to get that sort of sense of a performance, a choreography that was sort of taking place. The other thing was that the film was constructed to be seen on 3 screens, and I can show you the street market sort of sequences here. There are 3 synchronized screens in a row, which was the way in which it was shown in the galleries as an installation. Indeed, it was shown in that way at Artcore in the new exhibition space on sort of Albert Street last October, when it was part of the Otherlings exhibition. It's also the way in which it's been screened in festivals as well. And the reason for that was twofold. Firstly, to use that sort of long panoramic format to capture this sort of spectacular assault on the senses. But also, I think the triptych, the use of the 3 images, is a classic way of telling a story. But this is a sort of lateral 3-act play as opposed to a linear one. The other thing we wanted to do was actually sort of change the dynamic of the piece by having the interviews that we did conduct with various people sort of taking place across the screens where they were facing each other. So we created a set of interview scenarios where we interview people sort of separately, but then we sort of placed them across the screen, so they were almost having this sort of dialogue over the actual action that was taking place in the middle. And of course, what that's sort of drawing to attention to, I guess, is that it's a construct of reality in a way, like all documentary films are, because of course in reality the characters are not actually reacting to each other; they're actually reacting to the questions that we've been sort of asking them. But as I said, I think that creates a sort of interesting dynamic to the piece, and I think is visually and sort of conceptually something that gives it another dimension. I'm just going to run maybe just something towards the end of the film as well, so you can get some sort of sense of the actual quite spectacular nature of what's sort of going on. I'll just let this run for a minute or two. Okay, back again. Of course, as I mentioned earlier on, I hope you found that sort of interesting, and I'll put up the Vimeo link in a moment again, just so you can have the opportunity to look at that in your own time. As I mentioned earlier, with the huge global events that have been taking place over the last few months, it's been very interesting to see the way in which these two very different societies that are sort of depicted in these two projects have sort of dealt with the pandemic. Something that has no borders and is very difficult to control. And I think it also forces you to reflect on your own work, or my own work as a photographer and a filmmaker, whose role is to reflect and comment on society. And obviously, I think there's a sort of element of reassessing my own practice, in light of the very different world in which we now live in. So what I'll do is I'll put up the Vimeo link. Let me just quickly cut out of this, if I can. Which is here. And say, if you get a chance, there's a password there. I think it works actually. Let's just try it. Oh dear. It doesn't. Anyway, it does work. The link does work, and the password is Utran. And I'll post this up a little bit later on, so that you can sort of access the film as well. So I hope you found that sort of interesting. I'm just sort of looking here actually to see if there's anything that has come up on the screen next to me. Let's have a look. Okay, brilliant. Oh, I can't run now. Oh my God, did I have any problems using my camera in China? Yes, I did. So I'm just reading the comments here actually, and someone's asked me whether Ray Gumley has asked me whether I had any problems using the camera in China. Yes, I did. I mean, I think it was quite difficult to take pictures in some of the areas I was working in, certainly being a sort of Westerner, because you become very noticed. And I was on many occasions actually confronted about what I was doing. But generally speaking, I did manage to sort of engage in the project and sort of undertake the work. I think there's quite a lot of sensitivities around the UCLAN project at the moment, and certainly with coronavirus and things like that, a lot of sensitivities in terms of sort of control within China. But I managed eventually to sort of get the project done, and certainly there's been quite a bit of support for the project from the university in relation to that as well. I'm flicking through here. What else we got? Yes, and Ray has also commented on the film as well. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Ray. Let's see what else is there. Okay, and Linda's commented as well. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining me, tuning in. Thanks a lot, and hopefully you'll get a chance to watch the sort of video, the whole piece, in its form, in the 3-screen form in which it was originally sort of constructed. But hopefully I'll get a chance to speak to you all again soon. I'll answer any other questions that you might have as well by email a little bit later on. Thanks a lot. Bye.